Hi, I'm Evan Samet from Key Investment Group from Arlington, Virginia. And the word possibility means having the strength and ability to do anything you want in any term, whether it's business, whether it's personal, just always being open to whatever you want.
Hey, ladies and gentlemen, possibility seekers all over the world. Very excited this week to have another special guest from the US. It's getting pretty common, all these US guests I'm having, but I'm loving it. I have the magnificent Mr. Evan Samet from Key Investment Group. And Evan's going to talk to us a lot about the live industry, about entrepreneurship, about founding business, and about growth and resilience. Welcome, Evan. How are you?
Hey, thanks for having me on. Thank you. I'm excited to, share my experiences through COVID, pre-COVID, what I'm looking to do after, and, just the battles that I've been going through, every day. And, I'm excited to, share it with your audience and give as much advice or insight as I can.
Beautiful. I'm really excited about this because let's just start a little bit in here. I mean, you have a strong background in live entertainment and ticket sales and the live entertainment industry, and we'll talk a bit about that through COVID and the tough time that's happening. But what excites you about live entertainment?
It's just the unpredictability. It's just that simple. You watch TV and it's all predictable. It's all scripted. Being for me, I love concerts. I love sporting events. An interception, touchdown, the person who you just met 10 minutes ago gives you a high five and spills some beer on you and you're smiling all the way. You're going to a concert and you're waiting and, the person next to you're talking before the show and then everything goes dark and the crowd, just 20,000 people just freaking erupts. And, the beating that I get personally in my chest when those happen, and that I know that people that I've worked with get that, I have never found anything that matches that high.
I love that. Just before we jumped on this call, I was talking to one of my clients, and I was talking about a Bob Seger concert that I'd been to with my son, and he was saying, "Oh man, I've never got to see Bob because Bob doesn't travel much outside the US." And I was saying it was so exciting. We saw him in Missouri. We came all the way from Australia to see him and play, but I know exactly what you mean. And so we were meeting people there who are obviously Seger fans, and they were excited that we come from Australia, and they were from Canada, and another place was they were a few states away from Missouri, and you have this common bond, and then the lights go down. I love that point you had, whether it be sport or it be a concert. That sort of it's in the moment, it's in the now, isn't it? It's not that recorded, scripted.
Exactly. And it's just, again, like the just unpredictability. Everyone comes up, they're in a good mood. You're spending money, but you're doing it for something that you love, and something that you can't replicate. People always record the shows, and then, you go home, and what's the first thing you do? You tell your friends about this. They ask you, "Oh, what was it like when they played that song or that song?" And that feeling that you get, I just can't get it in anything else. Any other form of, recorded entertainment just doesn't do it for me like that does.
Yeah. So how did you get into the business side of it? So you had a business on the ticketing side. Tell us a little bit about that and how you got into it.
So I was 19. I was in, my college dorm room, and my friends and I had a show. I went to school in Connecticut, and, I had tickets. I bought tickets for a show. They were $10 a piece. The show ended up selling out, but my friends and I couldn't go. And someone else that we knew offered me $20 a piece for it. I go, cool. That was like the easiest $80 I've ever made. And I was thinking, I was that time doing a minimum wage job, just, around school, like just any other student would. And I, did the calculations. I go, wow, that would have taken me 11 hours of work to make that money I just made. And, then I was like, okay, I've loved live entertainment. Concerts have always been my favorite thing to do since my dad took me to see Bon Jovi when I was 15 years old. And I thought, you know what, why not start a business? I've started a very, very small business when I was in high school. Just, their definition of, $25 an hour, just no marketing, just as simple as could be. But I said, you know what, let me try to start something in a business that I love and, see what happens. And, mixing business with pleasure, they always said, do something you love and it doesn't really feel like work. And so I said, you know what, why not go for it? And it was probably the best decision I've made.
And so you founded it no capital, just founded the business and started from there.
Yeah, so then after that, there was this electronic music group called Swedish House Mafia, and they were playing their four final shows in New York. And I had around $6,000 to $7,000, in my savings. And without telling my parents, which was a very smart move at that time, I decided to risk it and buy $6,000 worth of Swedish House Mafia tickets. And it ended up being that it was like the biggest shows of the year.
Yeah.
And out of anything I sold in that whole year, that was still my most profitable, as random as that sounds. But the lesson that like I really learned from that, looking back on it years later, is I don't think I would have risked that money had I had to, put food on the table for family, had I had real bills to pay. I was a college student. Life was, easy. I went to class 15 hours a week like you do here in the States. And I said, you know what? If there's ever a time to risk it, now is the time, because I said I can make that money back when I graduate. I just said in my head, maybe it wasn't, looking back on it, the best thing to go all in on your savings. Maybe I should have gone 50%, but it ended up working out, and just the overall risk taking aspect of it.
Well, I think it was an educated risk, wasn't it? I mean, I completely agree with you. And I remember when I left my very secure corporate job as a corporate accountant. I was at Kraft Foods at the time, and I threw it all in to do a sales role. And oh my parents just cracked it. My parents cracked it. My boss cracked it. The person who kind of got me to the job cracked it, and they just thought I was just throwing away this massive career. But for me, even though I wasn't married at the time, I was single. I thought, well, what's the risk here? Because if I can give it a go for like 3 months, 6 months, even 12 months, and if I don't make it and I suck at it, I just go back. I had my accounting and business degree, and so I just there was plenty of roles around in those days. But I didn't want to get to like 35 or 40 and go, I wonder what would have, woulda, coulda, shoulda. I don't want to do that. And you kind of, look to me like like someone who's a bit like woulda, coulda, shoulda. No, you're going to have a crack at it. And I think that was risky, yeah, but I think it was an educated risk because what's the downside?
For sure. And, my dad and I have always been loving of the stock market and investing. And this guy who we just happened to read earlier, Peter Lynch, always said, invest, and this is, for the stock market, but invest in something and you see around you. I saw concerts. I've been to plenty. I saw the feeling people got when they were around live entertainment. I realized that, music albums were dying. When you think of the most famous albums of all time, they sold 10, 20, 30, 40 million copies. I mean, no one's buying albums anymore with iTunes, especially at that time, and even just going further, with streaming now. And, the kind of the social media hit where, people were able to record what they were doing. And when other people weren't there, there was a fear of, not to be cliche, but FOMO, like fear of missing out.
Yes.
And you know what? I kind of realizing that at least with this business, I knew what I was talking about. I knew what performers were popular. I just stayed curious just because I was interested in it. So I said, if I could turn my passion and my curiosity into a profit-making business, then this should be what I should go for.
So when you founded the business and you started to grow it, did you have the vision at that time that I'm going to grow it and sell it, or I'm going to grow it and keep it, or it was just I'm just going to do it and see where it takes me?
It was just kind of like a do it, and I tell okay, I threw in the first $6,000-7,000, but everything after that was tried to be a very, very slow build, and I never really planned. They always say, when you make business plans, you have to have an exit strategy. And, in my mind, yes, I get it, because I get it from an investor point. But I always think you should start a business out of passion. And if you're already thinking about leaving the business, then how could there be, a real passion? But I would say the first mistake that I made, which ultimately, this might be jumping ahead, but kind of that ended up making me sell the business, was I was afraid to, share my business secrets with anyone. Because at the time, there was nothing I was doing that was proprietary that, let's say you couldn't do or any of your listeners couldn't do. So instead of taking, advice from people and, kind of having people help me where I, maybe was weak, I just said, I just had my family help me, and they were only, kind of helping me part-time, whether it was with the accounting or, shipping tickets to people or organization things where I should have hired people full time and, kind of shared with them and allowed me to look at the bigger picture and grow. So I never really assumed that I was going to sell the business, but at a certain time I was just flatlining and I said, you know what? It's time for me to learn from people who have been in the industry. And then, an opportunity came across and at that time, and at this time, I still think it was the right opportunity for me.
Yeah, I think that's an interesting point. I work with an entrepreneur, and he taught me something, and he said, a business, it's always good to have an exit strategy from an investment's perspective. Yeah, I get it. And he said, but a business worth selling is also a business worth keeping. And so he said, it's just nice to have the option. And so he says, if you work on the fact that you're aiming to sell it, he said, if you're aiming to sell it at some point, it actually drives you to get the systems, the processes, the collaboration in. So you don't become what I call founder reliant, which is a lot of people get into. And he said, but then you actually end up having this business and then you go, what, I could sell it, but actually it's really profitable and I've systemized it. I think I'll keep it and then I'll use it and I'll expand to another business. But it's a really interesting way of looking at it. You don't have to sell it if it's profitable and it's really great. And you would probably buy it again. Well, why don't you keep it? It's completely up to you and where your lifestyle is and what your goals and aspirations personally are. I think so that was interesting for me. Did you take on employees? Did you have employees at any point? Or you just kind
no.
of
So, I mean, I think I was so nervous. I had, grandparents that were retired who were in business and, I had my sister looking for jobs and, my employees just kind of became her friends to help me buy tickets when I needed it, get on the phone and call. And, I think, and not to saying that, they were, I don't want to say uneducated, but I was hesitant to hire someone who I thought was like really inspired or really, genius, because I said, you know what, I'm going to teach them everything and, they'll go out and do it on their own. But sometimes people that are really smart open your eyes to things that you don't see because you're too close. And, I always wanted to have family work for me. And I think the most important thing about having family work for you, and this is, especially when you do business, because I always say, don't do business with friends, don't do business with family, is my family never gave me any capital to work with. So I knew that they were just helping me because they wanted to see me succeed. Had I went to my dad and, I grew up fortunate enough that if I said, hey, Dad, could you give me, maybe $5,000, he would have. But not taking that money from him or not even asking him to do it, had I given him $5,000, and maybe this is just the type of person I am, I would have always thought in the back of my head, is he making this decision to help me? Or is this a way to not blow his $5,000? Right. So not taking money from, family and just having family work for you, just out of the goodness, ended up in my mind at that time, what seemed like the best idea. But looking back on it, as helpful as my family was, they didn't have anything, they didn't have any experience in the entertainment industry. My dad worked in the toy business. My grandfather worked as a city planner. My grandmother was an accountant. So, I wasn't learning anything new about the industry. Everything that they knew about the industry were things that I told them. So
you were really solid in good accounting, business, finance background, which is good. I mean, honestly, that's a really good place to start for sure.
Yeah.
But what you couldn't do was really grow in the industry because you didn't have the expertise and again, I think it gets back to the passion too. You had the passion and the expertise for the industry. And that's where I think I think I'm a big believer in collaboration, where you can collaborate, not necessarily even be employees sometimes, but collaborate with people who are in the industry or going for the same audience you are, but even, different, not competitive to you, but you're after the same audience.
Exactly. And, I think had I hired, people who just had a little background in entertainment, we could have sat down at the table, just kind of spitball different ideas and, maybe they would have gone to bust. But, we would have went for it. Everything that I was doing, I never really had a team. And of course, I'm not knocking my family by any sense of the word, but they were, they had a financial accounting background. So they didn't have, that background to say, okay, how do we, double the business? How do we go up 10%, 20%, 30%? And then, so from 2013 to 2016, when I was getting it going, I really was ramping up, ramping up, ramping up. And then, by the end of 2016, all of 2017, and the very beginning of 2018, before I got acquired, I was just, flatlining, and I wasn't taking the steps at
Yeah.
that time to say, okay, something's going to change. There's something where you could say, okay, you could have year over year the same sales, but I'm putting in, these guidelines or these services, or this is what I'm going to start to do to say, by the next 3 years, I'm going to grow by 30%. I had, none of that.
Yeah.
And I just I realized that I didn't know enough, and I wanted to start to become something that was bigger than I was. And, and sorry to go off on another tangent, but you almost get like a little greedy in your mind, because when I first started, my ultimate goal was to make, sell $1,000 worth of tickets a week.
Yeah.
And then it was, sell $5,000, and then, it became 10,000, and it just starts going up and up. And then you start to hit those same numbers, and then they almost start to become boring to you because you expect such large growth that I go, oh, I want to be in a business where, we're doing, $100,000 or $200,000 a week. And that
Right.
was like what I considered big. And I
Yeah.
was nowhere near getting that. And I said, okay, how do I, go help, or how do I transition and help another company grow in this business? And then the opportunity with Key Investment Group came along, and it was a match made in heaven.
So tell me about Key Investment Group. Were they the ones that acquired the business and then you started to work with them, or how did
No,
so you sold out and then Key Investment Group came along?
yeah, so through a mutual connection who I knew who works now at the number 2 or 3, probably the second largest, ticketing company, said, hey, I know these guys in Maryland. I'm in Arlington, Virginia. For, people not as familiar with the Northeast, it's around 45 minutes from each other. These guys are really, really big in the sporting business. They have the infrastructure in place to get big. They're looking for someone with the music industry. I put you guys in touch, and, just hit it off, and, see what you guys think. And then we had a phone call that was like an introductory phone call that I think lasted around 2.5 hours
Wow.
as an intro phone call.
Yeah.
And, I got to the office, and, we just started clicking, and, we were right on the same page about everything, how we wanted to attack the market, what we were looking for, where the market was shifting, how, it was more now than just ticketing. It was meeting your artists, VIP experiences, getting a picture backstage with Justin Bieber, and then posting on an Instagram, and, having everyone go nuts. And, kind of realizing that artists were going to start tapping into that market. And, I could take my knowledge and my sales data and just my overall experience and combine it with the full back end that they had. And it was just from July of 2018, it was just steady growth every month for 20 months in a row.
So the ticketing side, so it went from just seeing, a concert to actually being a full experience, and therefore sort of different levels of experience you could buy. I guess that was the big shift.
Yeah, right now with live entertainment, we're seeing it, COVID, like a different way to sell, but artists are now a brand. Teams are now a brand. I'm from New Jersey, so you're the New York Football Giants. So you're more than just a ticket. You're the on the field experience. You're a tour in the locker room. You're a meeting the player. And if you can, kind of work in deals with these stadiums and the venues, you can get access to those things. And, in a sense, anyone can, go to a concert. That's great. You can go see Bob Seger. But if I told you, you flew all the way in from Australia to see Bob Seger, and I can get you, backstage, or I could get you a meet and greet with him, that's something that's a once in a lifetime experience. And right when we started realizing that was, I don't want to say the future, but, those moments that you could share, with your friends or your family, or, you
Sure.
can, in a sense, humble brag about to
Yeah.
whoever you are. That was the,
Or
the
not so
next
humble
step.
brag about.
Exactly. You're right. Not so humble brag. And, these different experiences that we were getting into, and partnerships that we could do with teams, and, having, a larger source of capital for us to take risks, but not have it risk our whole business. When it was
Yeah.
my own business, a risk of certain sizes that we would have taken a key investment group, had they gone wrong, it could have derailed my business.
Yes.
With key
Right.
investment group, it's just a portion of the business.
Yeah.
And
So
that's when it allows you to.
you're able to take those more educated risks because you've got the stronger capital backing to try different things. And I think that's a really interesting thing, and why collaboration can really work, and why sometimes in a smaller business it can you can be hamstrung a little bit, because the downside can be a real killer if it happens to be there. So let's talk a little bit about. I'm really keen to get your view on this, because you're so entrenched in live. What's happening in live music with COVID? I mean, without stating the obvious, obviously it's been shut down. Certainly in Australia, we've seen it. It's been tragic over here, and I don't know about the US, but the government certainly here has taken a very long time to kind of realize this industry is in disarray and despair. Have you seen what's sort of interesting things that artists have done during this COVID period, or different experiences they've tried to do in a more virtual environment? What's been your view?
So, at first, everyone started doing the virtual shows, and that was, kind of, the obvious thing at the beginning to do. And it was exciting for, 2 weeks or, 3 weeks. I kind of related to, how everyone would do these Zoom happy hours. I'm sure, you remember doing Zoom happy
Yeah.
hours. And then, after a couple weeks, you realize that it just really wasn't that exciting. Like it couldn't replace being there in person. So, then artists start to do drive-in shows, which, start to hit an initial success where, they would go to a local field, or they would go to a sports stadium, and, everyone would park 6 feet away in a parking lot. And, that had some initial success, but, it just became the thing where, there would be, where there were so many shows and so many games that that supply for everything wasn't that high, because you could spread different things. Now, every time there was a drive-in show announced, it was the only event. So everyone in the industry, kind of went to that event. So even if you were able to make a little money, the upside wasn't that high, because there was only one event. It'd be like, only being able to buy a house in one neighborhood or something,
Yeah. We
like,
didn't even
there
get
was
that.
just.
We didn't even have that here. Like our restrictions, I think, were so strong. There was some talk about it, but there's only been. I mean, I'm saying I'm literally, because we're just coming out of lockdown. We've really only ever had virtual here. We never even had the car park drive. They put it up for ideas, but it got shut down here. So that's really interesting. You guys even did that.
Well, it got, I think it went down because, so they started like, 6 feet apart, and, you had to park your car, and there were like certain spots, but then you could get out of your car, but only stand outside your car. And then, by song 2, maybe you're now 5 feet apart, and by song 7, you're 3 feet apart.
Right.
And then there was always videos circling around social media where it was like beginning of show, everyone, a mile apart. Show comes out for the encore, strangers have their arms around each other type thing. And again,
Right.
when the place is dark, you can only enforce so much, because no one
Yes.
can, really technically, go, and you can't search that many people. So, right now artists have kind of, went through different avenues to try to, stay afloat, because,
Yeah.
outside of, everyone always thinks of, oh, these artists must be making so much money. And yes, they do make a decent amount of money, but they also have bands, and they have crews, and, an artist is, in a sense, a mini corporation, and, they have agents and, PR people. So they've tried to do different, different ways of, making revenue. And we as a company have, tried, I think, a little late to try to, make alternative revenue. And part of this, I would say, I would take the blame for, because I don't think I necessarily realized how long, COVID was going to last.
Right.
I think I kind of started buying in later. Like, I know, me personally, I'm a big tennis fan, and, they're like, okay, comes April, I'm like, well, they're going to play Wimbledon. They've never not played Wimbledon. And then it comes to a point where, Wimbledon's canceled for, the first time ever. And then that's the the holy shit moment in my
Mm.
head where it's like, okay, there are not going to be live events for a while. And when you try to start plan alternative ways of revenue when you're under distress and your first term is kind of shot down, it's not your most clear mind of thinking. And one thing I've learned, and advice I give to just other business owners who reach out to me through connections I made is, now is the perfect time to plan for, or if you're starting a new business, figure out 2 or 3 different ways that you will make money or that you will be productive to your consumers if your first or alternative, or sorry, your first or your primary source of business gets shut down. So, for example, I have a friend who owns a restaurant, and things started opening up, and he started getting a lot of people in, and I started saying to him, you should put your food, or you say there's number one selling item, which was macaroni and cheese, into supermarkets. Try to get distribution deals in supermarkets. And he goes, what? Like, I'm making so much more on the restaurant. It's higher margins. The food's fresher. And, the best thing to have with macaroni and cheese is a beer. Might not have a beer if you pop it in the microwave. But I say, you know what? On the alternative, and I go, yes, I completely understand what you're saying. But if there's another shutdown, people are going to want to remember those experiences. And if they see, that they need to stay locked at home, they can order your macaroni and cheese in a box and eat it at their home. So you have another source of income, and again, it might not be as profitable, but you might be able to sell more because you'll have a million different people running into the supermarket who might see your product. So it's things like that, like figure out where your specialty is and figure out how many different ways without kind of killing yourself, how many different ways you can monetize what you're good at.
I like that idea of working at what you're really good at, but then how many ways can you monetize your specialty or what you're really good at? It's a really interesting one for entrepreneurs because you get this view. A lot of people say, you got to focus on the main thing and just keep really aiming for the one thing, and just don't consider don't deviate from that. And I was reading that book on Netflix by Mark Randolph, who was the original CEO, the first CEO.
Great book.
Great book, isn't it? And he talks about having plan A, B, C, D, and F, and he learned that through a lot of his outdoor hiking. When he said, I never crossed a river until I'd walk 300 or 400 meters down the other way to see what I was going to run into if I fell off. So if I got swept away, or I missed a log, or I missed my step or something, I knew exactly what I could grab onto 50 meters, 100 meters, 200, or where the falls were, so I shouldn't cross at all. Right. So I thought that really was good. That really made a big impact on me. And I went, that's really, so you can be really focused, but you got to have, a series of different revenue options in what you're talking about in your case, or different plans that still capitalize on your expertise and what you're passionate about, but you've got different ways of monetizing. I think that's a really great point. What would you do differently, Evan? So let's go back into March and you knew COVID was going to last 12 months, 18 months. What would you have done differently?
I think I would have tried at least at the beginning to get into the memorabilia business. I know stay-at-home collectibles and people were shopping to try to decorate their home. And, there are so many classic events, whether it's, Queen Live Aid or, Global Citizen Festival, that, at least, in Jersey, Bon Jovi opening Prudential Center, Billy Joel selling the Madison Square Garden for the 50th time, selling it out for the 50th time. There's so many live events memorabilia from live events that I knew what was popular and that sell for, over $10,000, that I should have gone into that. I would have gone into that business quicker. Collectible trading cards. There are cards that, Pedro Martinez wore, or Aaron Boone, wore when he hit his home run in Game 7 against the Yankees that had a piece of his jersey on it. These collectibles that people, that now, weren't spending money out, maybe to have them look at every day and, put a smile on their face and remember good times. I would have tried to look into more, how could I capitalize on the memorabilia collectibles business? Because I know music and I know sports. And, I know that I wouldn't have been able to generate the same amount of money for Key Investment Group had, we just done on live entertainment, because, our sales started getting, so high that I don't think there would be enough memorabilia that we could get in a certain amount of time to risk it. But, it would have kept us afloat, would have kept us floating more smoothly. And, we would have been able to focus on that instead of trying to, waste our time trying to buy and sell virtual shows, because we deep down knew that the experience wasn't the same. And we were trying to force the issue. And I think I wouldn't have tried to force the issue so much. I would have adapted to what was going on quicker.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point too. Was we start to see out this wasn't a small thing, was it? But yeah, and I think I wouldn't. You're certainly not alone in this. People thinking that it was going to be over within a month, within 2 months, and it's really has shifted things dramatically now. In my business, it's a lot of speaking. I love speaking live. I love being live on stage. But we just had to adapt and go, well, how can we do what we do? What's the other channel for doing that? Now, virtual. Clearly we've got to, but I think hybrid, I think it's going to be a hybrid going forward. I think I think there has been some stuff that's worked virtually, some other stuff it just hasn't. But I was noticing in the conference there, the event planners are saying that they're looking at 80% of their business over the next 12 months is going to be, it's this hybrid of virtual and live. So big sort of big virtual events. You've seen some of the stuff Tony Robbins is doing. Is probably a good example of that, or them hiring out big centers for key speakers to come through. And I was involved with seeing John Maxwell's version of what he did in March versus what he did in August. It was like chalk and cheese, because in March was like throw it together, man, because they had to cancel a big live session to August when they knew what they were going to do, and so therefore the planning was different. Are you starting to see that over the next say 18 months? And what do you think will happen in the live entertainment space?
Well, it became the most unpredictable part. This could have to do with American politics, and put it aside. But there was so much uncertainty. You were hearing new things every day. Vaccine will be ready by November, and then the next day you'll hear life's not going back to normal till February 2022. And you could read so many different articles and just consume so much. I think it's going to be very, very interesting to see how the performers view it versus the management versus their fans. So if you're a performer and you get the vaccine and okay, I'm healthy, my crew has it, 50% of people have it, are you willing to go back on the road, to risk it for your fans? I think there's going to be a lot of that. Do they want to go? There are certain artists who say, I'm ready to go out and play today, once there's a vaccine. And then there are certain artists who go, I'm not going out until, everyone's vaccinated.
Yeah.
And I think there's a difference between music and sports right now is for sporting events, you have TV deals, you have, jersey sales, you have advertising on game. So even if the stadiums aren't full, there are alternative ways to make money, and money on a mass scale. While the games are being played, people want to buy the jerseys. Teams right now are starting to look into sports betting, and hosting sports betting, which is always popular. In concerts, you can fill an arena a third capacity, but the feel isn't the same. It's a packed arena. Yes. And if the feeling is I can fill it a third of the way, or wait 9 months and then fill it 100% of the way without devaluing my product, I think that's the way that they're going to go. And I think that's the way I personally would go. But I think, February and March and April are going to be very interesting months, because in the United States, the way the music business works is, January through April, you do shows indoors, usually in arenas or clubs. And then April, May, depending, what state you're in, till around October, they do the outdoor shows. So, right now, outdoor shows, they say it's safer to be outdoors than indoors. So I think it'll be interesting to see, where we are in March and say, okay, are we ready for outdoor shows, and then progressively get better? So by the time, October comes around, we're ready then again for the indoor market.
Yeah, I think you're right about that. I think that makes sense if you're sitting there and you go third filled or all filled, as long as we've got some sort of certainty. And I think until we get the vaccine, it's going to be really hard for anyone to make a call. I agree on that. And I think I agree on the other point you made too, is just so many people involved in the industry, isn't there? That just apart from the artist, Troy Sivan, who's a fairly good, fairly
Yeah.
big artist out here. And he's been in Melbourne now. He's been living in Melbourne for a while. And he's just been fantastic in terms of, he said, I've got a big group that go with me. There's all this down, from people who do, imagery and graphic arts for his concerts, and to people who are doing the animations. He said, there's so many, it's like this little mini corporation, although it's all separate gigs. And so he's been active and just really keeping in touch with all his crew and his extended crew, and trying to involve them in all the stuff he's doing, because he knows that when he goes on tour, it's a big group, or when he's doing a new album, I'm using the word album, but a new set of recordings that a lot of people get downstream. And he's also been going out on Instagram and other things, just asking for new people. Hey, you know what? I'm thinking about doing something in 2022. I'm looking at the graphics for that. Hey, if you're on Instagram and you're a graphic artist, send me your stuff. And he's just been doing so. He just wants to keep the industry going. And I love that view of his, to say, because he knows when he does want to go, and if they're all gone off and become accountants, there's not going to much help.
Yeah, right. I mean, when you go to, events, you don't, a lot of people don't realize, and I, actually was, an intern for the Brooklyn Nets, just doing operations, because they were my favorite team growing up. And this was around 2013. And the game would start at 7 or 7:30. And I'd get to the arena at around 12:30 or 1 to start setting up, because people don't realize, the amount of work that goes into a show. You go to a show, the lights go on, the lights keep changing colors. That's a person. Someone brings out the guitars and retunes every instrument. That's that's a bunch of people working for them. You have people who book the shows. There are so many people who are involved in the industry besides the artists. And you're right. These artists that have a loyal following, they are in a sense a corporation. They employ probably 30, 40, 50 people just to help put on a show. So if you're going to a show that, let's say, only has a third of the audience, you're not going to that show expecting a third of the light show. You're
it's
not
100%. Evan, that's my point. I think if you're going there with only a third of the people, you still got all the you got fixed costs, and you got some variable costs, but mostly it's fixed cost. You can't say, well, we'll take the lights out of there, or well, we're only going to have a third of the audience, so we actually won't have rhythm guitarist, which is right. We don't need bass this one, so you can't do that. I mean, you can't do that, or you can sing a third of the songs. It doesn't work like that, does it? So I think it's really a dilemma. I think I agree with you on sport, though. That you do have you have contracts, and there's TV revenue. And of course, that's all is important, because you don't want that to go away either. And there's enough trouble with media as it is with different types of media and who's viewing, what on what. That's a big enough challenge as it is. So I think it's a really fascinating time we're in. I think we'll see new industries come out of this. I think we'll see new ways of revenue come out of this. I think we're seeing the acceleration, certainly the digital side of things. It's not a business or organization I speak to that isn't impacted by the digital seems to have been brought forward. So what we thought was going to happen in 3 years, we were kind of thinking, maybe we haven't done a lot of work on it, but we were thinking it's going to happen in 3 years. It's kind of here now. Do you agree on that? That's really shifted?
Yeah. And, I agree that, there are so many different ideas that are going to come from this. And, especially, businesses are trying to, make themselves marketable. But like one thing I've seen, and I've seen this in everything that I'm following, is there's that fine line of, in a sense, communicating with your consumers or your fans or your followers, but not overly communicating to where you're getting annoying. Yes. And, I'm not going to name, but there's an artist that I'm a fan of who started doing virtual shows. And I go, this was cool. But then they started doing virtual shows every week and then charging every week for it. And I go, you know what? It's just kind of you sitting around playing guitar. Like, I get more use from turning on my, big TV and with my sound speakers and playing live music. I get a better feel from that. I can do that, free all day. And there are certain brands that I see, completely outside the entertainment business who, are trying to keep themselves relevant. But, it's that fine line of posting enough, not posting enough, or posting way too much. And, that happy medium is the hardest thing to find.
Yeah, it is. I think we're all going through that, isn't it? Because as production comes up, when I say content production, there's almost overdoing content consumption. You're seeing email open rates falling. You're seeing just so much organic reach on a lot of social media falling. It's been really interesting to see who will be the winners and losers. And we're also seeing the sporting side. I don't know if you know, so the Australian Open, which is a pretty popular event, and for tennis,
Yeah.
you're a big tennis fan, I know. They're now looking at running. I think all the Australian Open will be there in Melbourne, but they'll also run the Perth Open in Melbourne and the Adelaide Open in Melbourne because
Yeah.
people have to quarantine. And so we're starting to see maybe bubbles, and it's looking like travel bubbles. We're looking like having one with New Zealand, and then a good travel bubble with Singapore started to open up now as well, where you don't have to quarantine. They've got this advanced testing because in Asia Pacific, I don't know if you recall, but they had a lot of the SARS epidemic that went a few years ago.
Yeah.
And so a lot of our Asian neighbours in Australia were really switched on with SARS. So when COVID came, they were actually in a pretty nice space. We were all, yeah, we were caught out. The US caught out more than most, and Europe caught out. But that'll be interesting to see what some of these countries that have actually coped well have done. And then what are they, and how does that reflect upon business? How does that reflect upon concerts, on tours, and the like? So it'll be interesting whether live music makes that. You might get artists, for example, not do much in North America, but they might do a Asia Pac
Yeah.
live concert series. Could you see that happening? That could happen, couldn't it?
Yeah, I mean, I know tennis, so what they're talking about with the Australian Open, they actually did here at the US Open where they had, they usually play this event in Cincinnati and they play the Cincinnati Open and then they travel to Queens, which they play the US Open. They just did it all at the same facility and just said,
Right.
here, just play it here just so you could quarantine. And, it's good because you have live events, but, then the hardest thing is, to make the fans at home feel like it is a live event. I know, you watch anything, any sporting event, and your team scores a goal, and or a point, and the crowd just erupts, and you hear that through your TV. It was kind of weird, like watching. I know I was watching the U.S. Open, and they would have a 20-ball rally, and it would end with a great shot, and you would just hear, you'd hear the one family
That's
member
right.
who was allowed in the audience
One
clap.
family member. That's right.
Yeah, exactly. And it was just very, very awkward and strange. And again, with everything with sporting, like they just had the Masters this weekend, and ratings were at an all-time low. For
Yeah.
the NBA finals here, MLB ratings were at an all-time low. So they're trying to replicate it, but it's just, unfortunately, it's just not the same. But it's the best that we could handle right now. And you hope that these sporting events, they aren't devaluing the product. The one thing that is helping us here in the United States is they're starting to allow partial attendance. So it actually helps us a little bit because the supply is much lower, and we're still able to get ticketing for it. And for a football game, it's more about what's going on the field, or a
Yeah.
baseball game or basketball game. So we are able to kind of keep out pockets there, but everything's so up in the air, and no one has experienced this before. So there is no right answer. And I think that's the
Yeah.
hardest thing that we've experienced.
There's no playbook for this pandemic, is there, Evan? There's no
Exactly.
playbook you can go back and can consult. And I've been working with some leaders who've been around a long time, and they've been through different crises and the like, but nothing like this one, and one that's going to be a health-led recovery. We've had economic-led recoveries, and we've had things that banks can do and central reserves and things like that. But this one's a health-led one, so it's really interesting being led by health experts. And we're all trying to adapt and flex, but it'll be certainly an interesting time. Hey, Evan, look, it's been great chatting to you. I've really enjoyed the chat and seeing where you are in the moment. This has been a great podcast of someone in the now, like literally we're still talking about where it's going to be. We should catch up. We should aim to catch up early next year and see what's in March. We put that down. As you said, March is going to be an interesting time. I reckon we should reconnect up in March, April next year and see how things are shaped up for you, and see what's come around, and how entrepreneurs are looking at this new world that we're in.
It's funny. I was actually thinking that in the back of my head, as I was answering the question and saying that, I go, I wonder what it would be like to re-listen to this in 6 months.
Yeah.
And just kind of say, wow, I was way on, and everything that I thought was right or not right, or what changes have been made in 6 months with vaccine news and lockdown news, and so much could happen in such a short period of time that you're right, and we should definitely stay in touch and almost do a follow up to like what's this industry like now.
All right, let's do that. So this is volume 1. We're going to do volume 2 in April 2021. It's been great having you on the show. Thanks very much, Evan.
Thank you. I appreciate it. Take care.
Hey, thanks for listening, and we hope you enjoyed this episode. Please subscribe and rate the podcast you listen to so we can continue to serve and inspire others. Remember, connect to us on all the social media channels. The Art of the Possible podcast is hosted by me, Rob Hartnett, and produced by Finn Hartnett. Connect with us directly on LinkedIn, Rob-Hartnett, Hartnett, and Finn Hartnett.
This podcast is a part of the C-Suite Radio Network. For more top business podcasts, visit c-suiteradio.com.